When we think about the global challenges, whether it's environmental challenges, food security challenges, we think about just economic growth here in Canada. Agriculture is an exciting industry, and we're kind of foundational to all of these bigger challenges.
Let's ask a basic question. How do these basic tools respond to today's challenges? If it's great, continue. If it needs adjustment, let's be bold. Let's design new instruments and new approaches that can help meet the challenges of today.
We'll never know everything we need to know. We'll never be fully trained up in all of the right technique and tools that are available. But the best and most important thing is get started, start nudging forward, and start to see progress and learn from it and adjust and adapt.
Look 5 years out, look 10 years out. What needs to happen to get us to where you want us to be? Hey there. Welcome back to Wicked Solutions, the Generate Canada podcast where we dig into big challenges and even bigger ideas. I'm Nick Batts from Kansas, and I'm thrilled you're joining us today. We're talking about something that literally feeds us all, how smart tech can help Canadian farmers grow more food and take even better care of the land. Think higher yields without trashing our soil, water, or air. We've got a couple of rock stars today, Dan Lussier from the Canadian Agri-food Data Initiative, and Craig Klemmer from Farm Credit Canada. They're ready to break it all down. Practical, on-the-ground insights mixed with a vision for the future. But first, let's bring it over to my co-pilot for this ride, David Hughes, President, CEO of Generate Canada. David, why is this conversation such a game changer for the country?
Thanks, Nick. Well, as you know, when we talk about Wicked Solutions, we're referring to the complex, interwoven challenges that demand new ways of thinking, collaborating, and innovating. And agriculture isn't just about growing crops. It's about addressing environmental sustainability, economic viability, social responsibility, and the future of our entire food system. This is especially here in Canada, where we have the potential not just to feed our own population, but to help supply global markets. Technological innovation is crucial in making regenerative agriculture not only possible, but also profitable and scalable. Whether it's using drones to monitor crop health, employing data analytics to optimize resource use, or integrating gene editing crops that can thrive in Canada's diverse climates, these advancements help produce more with fewer inputs while restoring soil health and reducing our carbon footprint. This is a prime example of how we need to approach complex problems with creativity, collaboration, and a commitment to long-term impact. So as you listen to today's discussion, I encourage you to think about how these innovative tools and practices can help us meet the ever-growing demand for food, protect our planet, and ensure that Canada remains a leader in sustainable agriculture.
I'd like to start out with a pulse check from both of you, starting with you maybe, Dan. Where do things stand right now in Canadian ag? What trends are pushing more people towards regen ag and tech adoption, innovation?
For me, some really important drivers right now are obviously a sense of uncertainty driven by geopolitical events and the reality in the global trading environment. But the other piece that's really important there, I think, is change. We have a significant amount of generational change occurring, but also change being driven by technological opportunity. So, those things for me are really colliding together and creating a space in which people are looking for and farmers are looking for tools and opportunities to navigate through some of those uncertain waters, but also seize the moment and bring those farm businesses into the next generation and into the future. So it's a challenging, but also equally interesting time to be in the wider space, I think.
When we look at the challenges of supplying food domestically and globally, it's been elevated recently. And I think that makes it an exciting time to be here. If we look at Canadian agriculture, over the last couple decades in the 90s and 2000s, we were having productivity growth of about 2% per year. So when we think about that, that's adding value to the overall industry. It's adding value to the products, and it's increasing what we're doing at a lower cost. If we look at where we are more recently here, we're seeing that productivity has been declining. So over the last decade, it's a decline from about 2% to 1.3%. We're on track to be growing at about 0.7% per year. So if we just kind of look at that growth and where we are, agriculture, that acceleration of increasing outputs with doing more with less has been slowing. So that creates a bit of a challenge of where we are and how are we going to meet the demands of the future, as well as take advantage of that growth in export opportunities and remain competitive in those industries as well, or in that trade environment. I also think that when we look at the industry overall, we're seeing more swings, and right now we're dealing with quite a bit of drought and kind of a longer period of weather impacts. And when it comes to that, there's a lot more attention. How do we be more resilient? What are the things that we can be doing right now to adapt to this, to make sure that we continue to produce high quality food and we get some reliability in that, so that we can transfer these farms to the next generation and we continue to have a strong and thriving environment here in Canada?
So there's some terms here we're talking about. I mean, I heard regenerative ag, I heard resilience. You both work closely with farmers and researchers. Define regen ag for me, Craig. Start with you maybe. What does this actually mean in practice?
Regenerative agriculture kind of takes a holistic approach to agriculture and farming. It's not only looking at preserving land and natural systems, but it's about actively improving them. So it's about doing more with less. It's about maintaining the health and the quality of the assets that we have. And where possible, how are we able to even build them up and make them more stronger assets for the future? So when we think about regenerative agriculture, to me, it's about incorporating best management practices. It's about technology and leveraging technology because it creates very exciting opportunities there.
The way I come to understand it as well, it's a collection of practices that are good farming practices that growers can choose to implement progressively within their business, which have both positive economic outcomes, but also these positive outcomes on things like soil and water quality. And that's a powerful combination. A lot of the basic ideas like minimal soil disturbance are a big part of Canadian agriculture, especially say in Western Canada, where low and no-till has become pretty much de rigueur across the grain and oilseed sector. That has all kinds of really positive impacts and has really been in place or growing since maybe 30, 40 years now.
We've spoken about practices that have been around for a long time, but not necessarily adopted or being used ubiquitously. And then we're also talking about new technologies and new approaches that are on the cutting edge of what it's going to take to drive regenerative agriculture. What I'm wondering is what is being done and what needs to be done on the learning side to help train the next generation of farmers and food engineers that will enable us to advance this work in ways that meet the emerging technologies, but also make sure that we are practicing those techniques that have long been known to be successful, but just aren't being adopted widely.
Dan talked about zero-till, and I always find this a really interesting example. Zero-till's been around for a very long time. I believe it was invented back in the 50s down in the United States, but it became widely adopted in Western Canada. So when we think about zero-till, for example, glyphosate and affordable glyphosate became one of the things that became a major catalyst in terms of changing farming practices. And what was so great about that example is that the return on investment it just skyrocketed. It made business sense and people adopted it extremely quickly. So I think one of the challenges when we think about this innovation and technology is that we do a great job of building the technology. We do a great job of advertising the benefits, but we don't always do a great job of investigating the return on investment, the business sense about it. Because when farmers know that it's going to make them money, when they see their neighbors or other people down the road using that technology, it's improving the profitability of their farm, it's improving the health of their soil, generating a positive momentum within their operation. People want to be part of that, and they want to adopt that as quickly as possible. I also think that we need to continue to expand those opportunities in places that we're showcasing technology. There are a few smart farms across Canada, and I think those are great so that people can test them at scale to see where those benefits are. And as we can do more of that, as we can kind of showcase them in real life on farms, that's going to help promote and see those opportunities and build that conversation around it. We got to build some excitement around this as well.
Yeah, I hope we can talk a bit more about that technology demonstration piece, because certainly we run a smart farm called Innovation Farms, and that's a big part of the story there. And there's a lot more to be said there. But if I'm going back to a keyword I think you had, David, which is education, training, how building that capacity in people, obviously that's important, right? We're talking about tens of thousands of small businesses located all across the country who are each making their own decisions, right? But we can never forget about those who are already in the sector, right? It's like folks are in that sector working for 30, 40 years at various stages of their own farm business's development. And, we need to also be investing in them. And that's where that technology demonstration piece can come in. But it's also a place where it's incredibly difficult because it's last mile type work. Yes, peer-to-peer. Yes, to maybe online learning. Yes, to other ways to build hubs and so on that can draw growers together. I think we need to be really creative there of how we reach farmers and really innovators inside of their own farm business throughout their career so that they're continuing to, of course, feed into their own skills and capabilities, but also preparing themselves to adopt what's coming next and down the line.
When we think about extension services in agriculture, it was about often provinces bringing farmers together and doing a classroom session. These took an incredible amount of time, half-day type of events. But now with social media and great groups like Emily and a number of other farm organizations as well as universities and the access to things like LinkedIn and using Twitter or X and taking these social media platforms And then you think about the role and how farming has evolved. You do see so many of these farmers engaged on social media learning, whether it's marketing, whether it's technologies, but there's a lot more opportunities to reach people as well while they're doing their job. And, I think there's some exciting things about that in terms of passing on the information. We just have to do a better job as a system to do that.
Craig, let me just jump in on that. You've identified the problem. You've said we just have to do a better job of that. How do we do a better job? This is the system's challenge. This is the wicked problem.
Maybe it's a coordination problem, where things are done in isolation. We're not telling our story collectively, not bringing these pieces together. So one of the challenges might be that we're doing things too much in popcorn approach. It's a good bit of information over here, a good bit of information over there, but how do we tell that story together and bring those components together? The other thing that I think we got to remember is that agriculture in Canada has been very successful. When we look at farm operations, they've been growing. They're very, very competitive in the international markets. They're very competitive domestically here. We see all the great innovations that have been added, and we get comfortable with where we are at, and we get comfortable with our success. So sometimes it's just about how do we jolt that? What are those new ideas, and where are we moving? And you need to pull on some of those threads collectively.
I mean, David, you really put your finger on it. It's complex, right? And I think that is true, and it's just a fact. We don't want to see that necessarily as a negative, but the sector is broad across the country. And within that, of course, you have farm businesses at all kinds of different stages of their own development. Those who are in really successful, strong positions, those who are close to generational change, those that are maybe struggling. But it cannot be there's only one way to do this, right? It's okay to try different offerings to continue to learn. We're still in that phase of trying to figure this out. But I think the key word there for us is learning. And so I think as a sector, we also need to do a bunch of that in the near future, is like trying different ways of doing this engagement with growers, listening to what they are saying about those offerings, engaging them themselves, of course, in that peer-to-peer learning opportunity that is really powerful.
Let's talk a little bit about that data and then the noise that creates sometimes in this complex space. When we're talking about data sharing, when we're talking about transparency, when we're talking about trust, these are big questions about who owns the data, where's the data going. Me as a farmer, I don't necessarily want you to have my data or see my data. How do we build that trust and that confidence and understanding what's the role of data in this and building transparency and data sharing? What systems do we need in place? But then also, who controls this data?
One thing I'm going to do right away is to say, I hate talking about the data because it's just not a realistic thing. No one says I want all of your farm data or I'm interested in all of it. It's probably elements of it and pieces of it. And that's the first step, is being really specific, like what exactly is being exchanged or what exactly is valuable. And that is a really good first thing to do. But also to stop talking about data sharing, right? It's like, how are we using data to achieve an objective? Sharing, I think, is a word that we kind of inherited from the social media ecosystem. And I don't think it's super great because it connotes that you press a button and all of a sudden everyone's aware of, say, all your proprietary and perhaps very sensitive farm business data, which is just not what's going to happen here, right? So if I'm to sort of push those off the table for a second, I think data is certainly an opportunity, and it really has a key role to play in animating digital technologies to support a whole bunch of on-farm applications. It really does come down to building a common language so people can talk about what they're trying to achieve together, the farmer and, say, the other side of that transaction, whether it's AgTech company, maybe a buyer, maybe it's an input company. But right now, we're really still building some of those, that functional language so those people can communicate with one another. That's where we've certainly been spending time. I think that's where we need to sort of start with a lot of this.
If the data is being transferred or shared, whether it's large pieces of it or characteristics of it, when that's being shared throughout the value chain with the goal of improving our output, improving productivity, improving decision making, and everybody's getting their fair share of that pie and benefiting from it, I think there's better adoption of it. If it's one company or one agent within the value chain that's able to take it and it becomes power over another agent in the value chain, that's when you're going to build, that distrust is going to increase. It becomes almost weaponized between two people or two agents. So when we think about the data side of things, it's how do we use it collectively? How do we use it to promote, build, strengthen Canadian agriculture, whether it's financial information, whether it's tracking of productivity, characteristics of output, whether it's fruits and vegetables or meat products. It's foundational for our success, I think. but we need to build that trust. And then you get the layering on of all the social media stuff about cybersecurity. And one thing I think that we need to consider, that so many companies that are building these products for sharing data and technology are talking about all the benefits and all the positive things. And sometimes we forget about and making sure that we're bringing up that cybersecurity to protect our data. So it doesn't take too many bad instances that kind of spoil it. So, as a collective, we need to talk about protecting ourselves and protecting that data from bigger environment and leveraging it to make positive impact for what we're trying to achieve.
See, in this modern environment where data and digital is a big role to play, farmers don't have to become a cybersecurity network engineer. They just need to be conversant, right? That way they know how to manage the most important risks, seek help where needed, and to engage resources. But becoming conversant is incredibly important, because otherwise, like in the context of cyber, you may leave an important risk unmanaged, which, could have significant consequences. So in a lot of these spaces, I think that's the goal, is can we get more folks into that state of being able to engage on the issues and to help either manage risk or, like Craig was saying, seize those opportunities. How can I deploy some of my farm data to help the whole value chain, or to attach value to a commodity, a product that I'm producing in a way that without that additional information might not be possible, right? So I think that's really where a lot of that action is, and getting the ecosystem moving in that direction is incredibly important.
And Dan, what you're just speaking about, I think speaks back to the training, right? The kind of training that's required for the next generation and past generations of farmers, but also very thoughtful and careful design of the tools to be user-friendly for an audience that isn't going to be necessarily overly technical.
Canada's an export country. We don't use most of the stuff that we produce, particularly in agriculture. So that also means that we need to find investment from global companies. We need to find investment from local companies to invest in our innovation. How does that happen? How do we do that? But also, how does that fit within the policy framework that Canada currently operates?
Canada is in a global context. Agriculture is global, and we're one of those players. So when we think about where's the next innovation, where's those opportunities, we need to look outside our borders. And whether that's investing in companies outside of Canada and bringing that innovation into Canada, whether it's just attracting those companies to come into Canada because we have good solutions, or it's even taking management practices of traditional practices of Indigenous populations from around the globe to bring in those management pieces into our environment, because agriculture is changing. The crops that we grow are changing. The way and the demands of consumers are changing. These are all going to be really great opportunities for us to ensure that Canada thrives in this global marketplace and ensure that we're profitable and protecting our competitiveness relative to everybody else that we're competing with.
We're equally thinking about that innovation system that delivers world-leading Canadian AgTech companies. In that context, those companies, yes, they should be servicing and looking at the Canadian farmer as a key client, but naturally, they need to also be thinking about that global opportunity. Where can they deliver a defensible, world-leading piece of technology or service that can, of course, succeed in other important global markets, places like, yes, the United States, but equally Europe and Asia and South America. Here in Canada can do a lot more, I think, to help support our innovative AgTech companies so they can go out and turn that flywheel of bringing products to market globally, bringing profits back to Canada that then can be reinvested in further deep innovations and so on, that can then be commercialized both to the benefit of their own future success as an AgTech company, but of course, to the benefit of Canadian farmers. So I think there's that other aspect there that is not just about the farm production that we have and export, globally, but equally about how we can grow and strengthen our position within the AgTech sector to become a large exporter and a globally successful brand of Canadian innovative AgTech products that, turn that flywheel for both Canadian farmers as well as for those innovative companies.
We're coming up to the end, guys. And as we're looking forward here, look 5 years out, look 10 years out. What needs to happen to get us to where you want us to be? Here's your chance to pitch it.
When we think about the global challenges, whether it's environmental challenges, we think about food security challenges, we think about just economic growth here in Canada. Agriculture is an exciting industry, and we're kind of foundational to all of these bigger challenges, whether it's domestically in Canada or beyond it. I think we need to address the productivity challenge that we see in Canada. If we want to continue to be global leaders in food production, or if it's just about maintaining our competitiveness of farms in Canada in the global sense, addressing productivity is very important in my mind to maintaining that competitiveness. So what does that mean? To me, I guess it means a few things. Innovation is going to be a solution. Research and development dollars in Canada have been declining relative to other countries around the world, so we got to continue to spend money, research, innovate, show value, provide that return on investment so that farmers are quick to adopt. And then it's about just showing it off, displaying it, telling our story, being excited about it, bring value to it. And I think people are going to start jumping on that and driving that forward. And I think we're just on the cusp of some really exciting things with all the technology that's coming in and, transferring things to the next generation and the excitement of this next generation to incorporate technology to make better decisions.
Where are we going, Dan? And how are you going to build on that?
I'm going to sort of maybe point in a different direction and also get a little really hands-on with, I think, some work that is in front of us over the next couple of years can play a role in getting there. In the Canadian agriculture, a key policy instrument, so we can talk a bit about government, something we haven't maybe done a ton here so thus far, is the agricultural policy framework, currently called the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. We're kind of at midway through that. It runs till 2028. Feels like a long way away, but actually, if we look at the next policy framework that will come into existence on April 1st, 2028, the real work to make that happen, to bring that design through the process needed to develop the policies and programs, it's already started, right? And in fact, if you're not already engaged there, everyone who's interested in this needs to engage today, because that's where a significant amount of government dollars, but also programming that touches farmers and innovators and so on, it really comes from, right? So if we're talking about where do we need to go as a sector looking out 5 and 10 years, that next agriculture policy framework is incredibly important. It's a big tool that we can use as a sector and governments can use to help affect change and drive some of the outcomes that Craig's talking about. The current basic structure of the policy framework has been more or less similar or the same for the last 20-25 years. Let's ask a basic question. How do these basic tools respond to today's challenges? If it's great, continue. If it needs adjustment, let's be bold. Let's design new instruments and new approaches that can help meet the challenges of today, which I think we all agree are dramatically different than they were at the dawn of the 2000s. But that work starts now, and it cannot wait till the year 2027 to make an impact.
Dan, Craig, huge thank you. What a great conversation. You really helped us connect those dots between new tech that can drive us to better yields, and smarter, more sustainable farming across Canada. Before we sign off, I'm bringing David back in to help us land this plane. David, give us a quick recap of the big takeaways. How do they tie into this Wicked Solutions way of thinking?
Yeah, thanks very much. This has been a fantastic conversation. I wish we had more time. Certainly can have future sessions drill deeper into some of these things. First of all, I was struck by the comment that it's an exciting time to be in agriculture. And it's clear that the challenges are significant. These are wicked challenges. But really at the top of the list is that we need to increase our productivity, which has been in decline, and doing so in a way that's good for the economy, good for the soil and the agriculture, and also good for our people. The second is that this isn't just a discussion about technology. It's also about planning, and it's about the people and giving them the skills that they need to be a part of using those technologies in ways that can yield the best results. And it's about data. And I won't say the data, but data in its many different forms and how we use it analytically, not just sharing the data, it's how we use that to make decisions and navigate through the improvements that we need to see. Coordination. The phrase was used about popcorn approaches, where we're kind of little stories here and there pop up, but we don't have a solid coordination of both the work and the storytelling to get the ideas out there that will help drive the regenerative agriculture ecosystem of the future. And so we have to get better at that. And the last thing that I was struck by, we've heard across the entire Wicked Solutions series, it keeps coming up, but you reinforced it here in this conversation. And that was the importance of not letting perfection be the enemy of good. We'll never know everything we need to know. We'll never be fully trained up in all of the right techniques and tools that are available. But the best and most important thing is get started, start nudging forward, and start to see progress and learn from it and adjust and adapt. And in that way, we're going to kind of see solutions to the wicked challenge that's before us. But we can't thank you enough for contributing to our conversation. I know that our listeners will have gotten a lot out of this. Thanks again.
Thanks, David, and a big thank you to all who are listening here today. We really appreciate you spending the time with us. We hope you enjoyed today's session and gave you something to think about. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to the TheFutureEconomy.ca newsletter so you don't miss any upcoming episodes at all. Head over to GenerateCanada.ca to explore more wicked solutions that are in the works. See you next time.